I'm assuming that most of you who are here on this channel, you have some appreciation for nature or have had some experiences out in nature. I don't quite know how nature does it, but I find that when people come out to Reweld University, nature seems to give people exactly what they need. And it does that on a very individual basis. So that some people encounter all sorts of fears. Some people encounter boredom as their mind tries to quiet down from all the distractions of civilization. Some people encounter just the raw elements of cold and heat and bugs. Some encounter a profound sense of peace and stillness. And it's a little mystical almost, the way nature seems to know what you need and hands it to you. And here, I'm hoping that we could share some tales, some stories about things that happened in nature that changed us in really profound ways. Then, in reading through the comments, we can see each other's stories and take some inspiration and wisdom from them. This could be something joyful that happened to you. It could be something terrible that happened to you. Either way. But out of this experience, how did you grow? How did you learn? What happened to you? I'm going to share a story. And this is when I was quite a bit younger. And I was with a group of people doing a feed the mosquitoes adventure. And what it is the concept that you go out, you take off as much clothes as you're comfortable with, and you let mosquitoes bite you for a period of time. And I wasn't heading this up, I was just along for the ride. It was in this swamp where there were a lot of mosquitoes. I mean, a lot of mosquitoes. And there in that swamp, everybody was sitting, with their shirts off and kind of in their underpants and letting mosquitoes bite them. People were crying, tears in their eyes. But I was kind of this young, like, oh, I can do anything kind of teenager that, I mean, if you could see my teen self, I was very confident in myself, even though I had inner unconfidence. But on the exterior, I tried to be very confident in the woods. And so I sat there rather stoically while other people were squirming. And then the leader of the event said, okay, this is over, and everybody got into their tents as night came. Now, I, of course, being so gung-ho about everything, I didn't have a tent. I just had this little cotton sleeping bag that was kind of already wet from being down in the swamp water. And I crawled into it, and that's when this night, this dark night of the soul, began for me. It was the mosquitoes. I mean, they just kept coming and coming and coming. And I'd go under my sleeping bag and it would be too hot. So then I'd come out and they'd bite me and they'd bite me. And before I'd been stoic, but now I was sitting there by myself, and 1 hour turned into 2 hours, turned into 3 hours. Time slowed down. If you've ever been in an experience like this, I was looking up at the night sky, and I became convinced that the sun was never going to come up again, because those 3 hours, they seemed like about 20 hours. And I was being tortured. I would go back and forth between breathing and swatting mosquitoes, and inside of me there was this tension rising. anger, frustration, this feeling of deep anxiety that I could not get out of this situation. And I started to just cry and cry. And there wasn't anybody in that group that I felt I could go to and say, I'm in a really tough place here. Can I come into your tent and get some shelter? So I just sat there crying in my sleeping bag. And they kept coming, and it went on and on. I swear this happened for 30 hours, it felt like. It just went on and on. And spiders were crawling into my sleeping bag, and I had become by then very sensitive, very freaked out. I had been creating all this in my mind, this rolling kind of vicious cycle that was dragging me down into this pit of despair. And the fear that I experienced that night, it just was overwhelming. There came a time when it built up to a climax. I wanted just to scream and get out of my sleeping bag and run home, even though I was, 100 miles from home. And I was desperate. And that is when something broke inside of me. And the thing that broke, I believe, was the part of me that felt as if my willpower could conquer anything. Because up until then in my life, I thought I had an ironclad will. But here, my willpower, it failed me miserably. And as soon as that will broke, I felt this sudden sense of relief. This feeling flooded over me, and my tears turned into a smile. And I suddenly could feel those little pricks of the mosquitoes all over my face and neck. And they were the tiniest little sensations. They didn't actually hurt. And I could hear the mosquitoes, zzz, which before had been this maddening sound. And it was just this buzzing sound that became almost like music. I remember getting out of my sleeping bag. I was naked. I got out of my sleeping bag. And I started walking off into the swamp. And I would have been completely freaked out to wade through that swamp before. I mean, leeches or monsters, who knows what was in that swamp. But here I was, covered with mosquitoes, naked, walking through the swamp at night. And I had no fear. And in that moment, there was this overwhelming sensation of peace that words cannot describe. And that, when I came back to civilization after a few months, because I was out in the woods for a while, I remembered that feeling, because that feeling stuck with me in the woods to quite a large extent. And I wanted to share that with people. I didn't know how. I didn't know what that was that had happened to me. I had no words for it, a way to describe it. So I came back to civilization and kind of got back into the cycle of things and lost myself for many years. But during that time, I started to explore Zen and Taoism and some of the Eastern philosophies that started to speak of and describe experiences close to what I had experienced out there in the woods. And as the years passed, I continued to explore ways to try to find that state again, to understand my will, my sense of ego and self, and how that had a certain power, but how it also had certain limits. and how I could continue to invoke that feeling of total release and vulnerability that happened that night, which paradoxically gave me strength to laugh at something that moments before was driving me into tears and despair. So that's my experience. That singular experience, in a way, shaped my life and has resulted in Rewald University and these videos and having people out here. So it was very pivotal for me. If you would like to share your experience of something amazing, frightening, life-changing that happened to you out in nature, please share it in the comments below. We'd love to hear about these things in your life that really made a difference, and I think we'd all love to read it. So, thanks, my friend.